A-level literature students, welcome to your final lesson. This is the lesson that's final in so many ways. The first thing I want to say before I launch into what it's going to be about is well done for your focus. You have enjoyed, I hope, studying Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar with me. And you have also been explicitly instructed on how to write academic essays. All of that course of study has been demanding and challenging and has required of you deeper levels of thought, hard work, commitment and resilience than you probably ever expected to have to draw from, but you have dug deep, and I want to tell you that you've done really, really well in the way that you have approached things and acquitted yourselves. So this lesson is, if you like, a culmination of our study of The Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar, but also our study of what it takes to write well academically. This is focused on one of the things that you will have to do in the exam for paper 2. It's a complicated exam in the way that it's structured. You have 3 texts to work with, one of which we will be studying in year 13, so we're not quite there yet. You will have a single text question, and then you will have some unseen work to do. Again, that's for next year. And then you have a comparative question. How it works is this, and this is the way that we want you to work. I know other schools have made different decisions. We are leaving things very open for you to, at Carshalton, to make a decision on the day with what's best for you. We recommend that you read all of the options for the single text questions. You will have 2 on Streetcar, 2 on Handmaid's Tale, and 2 on feminine Gospels to choose from. And you decide which one of those is best for you. And that's on the day of the exam. We want you to have ultimate choice. But whichever one you choose, that means the remaining 2 you have to use in the comparative question. And that's what today is all about. So I want you to imagine that you have chosen the feminine Gospels as your single text. So that one's out of the way. You've answered that question. And what remains is to write a comparative essay on Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar. And I'm going to give you some guidance today on how to do that. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully this will work as well as it has done before. And so you see, yes, the title is Comparative Academic Essays. And I'm just going to do that. There's the usual equipment that you're going to need for this lesson. And as you can see, you need both copies of the text. We're working with both, and all the other things that you usually have. There's a quick do now for you, which I am going to give you some time with. So you can go ahead and press pause to get on with those questions. I'm just going to minimize myself while you do that for a few minutes. A few more seconds. Ten. Okay, let's go through the answers. So the answer to question 1, what's the central concept? Obviously, it's the American dream of that question. Number 2, general statement, and you've got an example there. What it does is it outlines the overall idea. That would be the first sentence in an introduction. A specific statement would be one that gives an example of the concept. In this case, it's an example to do with streetcar. And a thesis statement, the answer for number 4 would be B, developing an idea about the particular example. So a general statement is outlining the overall idea. And if you look at the image there, it's one that we worked with. It's this idea of where are we? What is this general area that we're looking at? In the case of this question, it would be the American dream. Given an example of the concept is explaining how streetcar or whichever other text is an example of the American dream. And the thesis statement is developing an idea about that particular example. And you can see that points to the branch of the tree. So the general idea is the general area. The concept is that arrow there that's pointing to the tree. And the thesis, which is an idea about the example, is the branch that's coming off the tree. Hopefully that was a good bit of recall for you. So this is going to be your final examination, if you like, of the year question. It is framed exactly how a comparative question tends to be framed in an exam question. Sorry, I'm just going to minimize myself here so we can see it. And the question goes like this. In modern literature, conflict between two worlds is shown to be a factor that profoundly affects the lives of people. Compare the significance of conflict in 2 texts you have studied. Remember to include in your answer reference to how meanings are shaped in the text you are comparing. Now, just a little note about how these questions are composed. They pretty much follow the same pattern every single time. You have an opinion, a quote about modern literature, something that is typical or frequently found, or some sort of comment on modern literature. So it will be a broad open statement, non-specific. Then you'll have an instruction beginning with the word compare. And then this third sentence is pretty much the same for every single question, even worded the same. It's just a reminder that it's literary analysis that we're doing. You've got to analyse how authors shape meaning in texts. So we're back to some of the bullet points that we worked with initially. These are the steps, if you remember, that you have to take when you're unpacking an exam question. It seems like a lot of steps, but the more you do this, the more second nature it will become, and you will follow these steps naturally and efficiently by the time you've got lots and lots of exam practice under your belt. So the first thing that you have to do as a student in the exam is to work out what the central concept or the main literary idea of the question is. Then you have to know what your ideas are about the concept, but if it's comparative, you're having to do it for both texts. So what's the central concept that connects the 2 texts? And what are your ideas about that concept in Handmaid's Tale and in Streetcar as well? Now, in a single text question, you would probably want to come up with about 5 ideas, 4 to 5 ideas. But this is a comparative essay question and you still only have 1 hour. So I have said here in my 3rd bullet point that for a comparative answer, 3 ideas is ample, it's adequate. You simply won't have time to do justice to comparatively work with any more than that. And then once you've worked out what those ideas are, it's the same thing, looking for evidence and how the authorial method works in that evidence, and then making a decision for each of those 3 ideas, which one is going to develop into an AO3 commentary at the end, contextual analysis in other words, which one is going to develop into a typicality analysis, AO4, and which one of those 3 points is going to develop into a perspective analysis, AO5. You have to make sure that each point addresses each AO. So you have to deal with AO3 for one of the points, AO4 for one, and AO5. You cannot afford to miss out an AO, even though you're only covering 3 points. It's the same principle. Okay, so I'm going to minimize myself again. With the central concept and thesis, when we were working with a question similar to this, but just focused on streetcar, we know that the general idea of the question, the central concept, is the nature of conflict. You know, what is conflict in these texts? How does it work? We've already said for streetcar, it's a conflict between the old and new worlds. But how does the nature, the concept, the notion of conflict work in Handmaid's Tale? Where do we see, in other words, conflict in the Handmaid's Tale? And as you can see, the template goes on. You'll find this template on Show My Homework, so you'll be able to fill it out when the time comes. Just go back one, and I'll use this one to say that when you're writing your main body paragraphs, nothing's changed. They all begin with a beautiful claim. They all continue with supporting details of textual evidence, literary analysis of authorial method, then developing into one of the AOs 3 to 5. And right at the end there, you've got some reminders about how to write an effective conclusion. Remember, there's guidance for this in the tutorials that are on YouTube. So if you want to refresh your memory, how to write a good conclusion is to write a sentence refocusing on the thesis statement, then to go on with several sentences that synthesize and evaluate the ideas of that concept, and then to add some interpretation, some final interpretation about where you've got to on the journey. So if you need to refresh your memory on that, you can go back to those previous PowerPoints. Here's another thing that you've seen before. When coaching you, instructing you on how we are to understand an academic essay, I have compared it with a journey. And, you know, at the start of the journey, you must say where you are, where you're headed, what you're going to be looking at, your general area of exploration. Then you visit various points along the way to look at different things. And then by the end of the journey, you explain where you've got to in this journey. Sometimes you can be very conclusive. Sometimes you can only be partially conclusive, but you need to state where you've got to in your exploration. So hold on to that thought, because that is something we've been working with for some time now. How does it work, scholars, in a comparative essay? Is it the same principle? I don't know how you've written comparative essays before, but often students will almost write them as if they've got 2 parallel essays just sat together side by side. You would be able to separate the paragraphs to do with text 1 and text 2 very easily. And it just feels like it's two essays just sat side by side. Here's an example which you can pause and read in your own time. It's a very good essay, but it's not a good comparative essay. What the scholar is saying in their analysis is good quality, actually, but it doesn't tick the boxes of what we want for a comparative essay, because it's not integrated enough. So what we're actually looking for is something that's a bit more like this image. You've got a central concept. In the case of your essay, your final essay that you're going to submit to me, the central concept is conflict. And you're going to be looking at how that works in The Handmaid's Tale, consider that to be the blue arrow for sake of argument, and also in Streetcar. But we do not want to see two parallel essays, one about Handmaid's Tale, one about Streetcar. We want to see them converge at many points throughout your academic writing. So we might understand that, but how does it work in practice? Easier said than done. Well, I can instruct you and help you on how to think your way through this. One of the biggest misconceptions that we have about comparative writing is it starts with the beautiful claim. Now, we've said this before. Beautiful claims are very short, but they are the foundation upon which a strong academic essay is built. When it comes to comparative essay writing, nothing's changed. The beautiful claims are the foundation on which a strong scholarly comparative essay is built. But where do students often go wrong with comparative essays? Just like with other essays at the beginning. When they begin to write main body paragraphs, it's very tempting for A-level scholars to write beautiful claims that are binary or oversimplistic in comparisons. Now you're looking at this slide and you're saying, what on earth do these two films have to do with academic writing? Well, I don't know if you know these films. One of them is 12 Years a Slave, and the other one is Tarantino's Django Unchained. I want to put to you the idea that texts are very rarely completely the same or completely different. More often than not, they will deal with a similar idea, just with different emphases, different focus, different style perhaps, or a different intellectual priority. 12 Years a Slave and Django Unchained, they are both films about slavery. But if you've watched them, or if you go on to watch them, you'll see that stylistically and in terms of message and focus, they have completely different emphases and priorities. But we could compare them because we know that they connect. Let's have a look at how this works perhaps closer to home in terms of academic writing about literature texts. Perhaps a classic beautiful claim that we would have here is something like this. Both Atwood and Williams suggest that modern life is disappointing. I'm, of course, as I usually do, I'm going to be working with a different question in my examples to the one I've set you. Otherwise, you're going to be awfully tempted to copy the examples that I give. So I want you to imagine that I'm a student and I'm answering a question. And the central concept of that is that modern life is disappointing. So I've written this beautiful claim to begin a comparative paragraph. Both Atwood and Williams suggest that modern life is disappointing. Okay, but that's very binary, isn't it? I've just decided that they are completely the same. But we know that can't be the case. Hardly any texts are completely the same or completely different. Okay, so what am I doing here? Whereas Williams suggests modern life is completely disappointing, Atwood, in contrast, suggests that acceptance of this keeps the human spirit alive. Now that's a longer, beautiful claim, but it's still binary. That's the problem with it. All I've done that's different there is I've said that they're different. So in both of these options, there is a strong misconception here that I have got to state from the off, from the get-go, that these two texts are either completely the same or completely different. And by the time we come to A-level, we must have formed the notion that most texts are way more complex and nuanced than that. And that has got to be reflected in our comparative academic writing. So what would be better? It's longer. Everything's going to be longer with a comparative essay, and that's why we don't have as many points. Let's take a look at this one. Whereas both Atwood and Williams present modern life as disappointing, Atwood suggests that we must accept and to a certain extent evaluate the reality to better understand what it may take to survive. Williams, in contrast, seems to see no redeeming features in a self-reliant and uncaring society where characters are exposed to uncontrollable forces that might benefit or destroy them. It's a much longer, beautiful claim, but it's much more what we want for scholarly academic comparative writing. We acknowledge what connects the texts, but we are also exploring how they might differ as well. A much more complex and nuanced understanding of connections between texts. So the hard thinking continues without a shadow of a doubt. You can see that's the image that we are aiming for. Just a reminder here that we still think of main body paragraphs in the same way as for academic writing about single texts, but there are some add-ons. So as you can see, AO1 is still the first slice of bread, if you like, but as I've just explained to you, the comparative ideas have got to encompass both texts and should consider the complexity and nuanceness of the fact that they will be similar, but they will also be different. And each beautiful claim, you'll make 3 of them, needs to capture that approach, that there will be things that connect, but also things that differentiate between the two texts and this central concept which you're working with, which is conflict. AO2 is still the other slice of the bread, but you will not just be doing a literary analysis of both of these texts. We don't want to see a parallel one. We want you to be comparing authorial method as well. When it comes to the filling, if you like, which happens really at the end of the main body paragraph, you will be either moving into an AO3 contextual analysis, AO4 typicality analysis, or an AO5 perspective analysis for each of the 3 points, making sure that each of those AOs is covered once. Now, you could make your life simple and say that for point number 1, it's going to be a contextual analysis for both texts. And then the next point is going to be a typicality analysis. And then the next point is going to be a perspective analysis for both texts. Or you might want to, and this is when you've, your skills have been a little bit more developed, you might want to complicate your life even further by saying, okay, so for point 1, it's going to be a typicality analysis for text 1, but actually I'm going to go into a perspective analysis for text 2. Now, you can do that and there's no problem with it, but you just need to keep track of it in your planning to still make sure that every AO is covered. Okay, so personally, I would recommend doing it the simplest way first, which is just doing a typicality analysis for both texts, a contextual analysis for both texts in the same paragraph, and so on. And then if you want to, getting fancy and more sophisticated, I don't necessarily think it is more sophisticated to do it the second way, but it certainly is more complicated. So just stick with a simple approach for now. So the main point of this slide is to remind you that the construction of a main body paragraph is exactly the same in principle, but it's got to include both texts. And you are comparing throughout, not separately. Hopefully you're still with me and I'm not blowing your mind. Remember, you can rewind this and replay things and pause things as you need to. There's quite a lot here, isn't there? Here's another reminder of what the AOs represent, but I think we're good now. I think we have really absorbed these and processed these and understood these. We're secure, but it's a reminder anyway. Okay, now I've got something for you to do. I'm just going to go off screen. The question that you're having to tackle, which is on the first few slides, is about the nature of conflict in The Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar. So what I'd like you to do now, when the pause button comes onto the screen, is to press pause and to see if you can come up with a sound introduction, an introduction that makes a general statement about conflict in literature, why writers write about it, a specific statement that applies to Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar, how does conflict work in both of those texts, and then a thesis statement for both of those texts, making broad comparisons between them at this stage. Go ahead, press pause, do some hard thinking. This will take you a little bit of time, but take your time. Press play when you're ready to move on. I will go on in a few seconds. Okay, now I'm going to be giving you an example of a main body paragraph, and we're going to talk through, how you might do a main body paragraph as a student. I'm just going to kind of talk you through my thinking of that. But I just want to remind you that I'm going to be working with a different question for my examples than the one that you have to tackle, and you know the reasons why. So the central concept for my question is that modern life is disappointing. Have a read of this, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about it. Maybe better still, I'll read it to you. I'll go off screen to do that. Both protagonists have the opportunity to seek solace in love, yet Atwood depicts Offred's liaison with Nick as more fulfilling than William's depiction of Blanche's courtship with Mitch. Atwood's imagery conveys Offred's determination to snatch whatever happiness is available to her. We see Offred longing for light to secure the memory. Quote, "I have to make do with a searchlight, memorize him, save him up so I can live on the image." Unquote. It is the symbolic moon that Offred has preferred to this point, quote, "lunar not solar," with its association with fertility and her value in this society. But now, with the return of physical affection to her life, she is able to counteract the disappointments of faded memories and have a chance to make new memories to support her survival. Similarly, it is the symbolic expressionistic use of light by Williams in the stage directions that illustrates not just Blanche's desire to hide her fading beauty, but her wish to believe in magic rather than the disappointing realities of her life. Quote, and it's stage direction, so it's bracketed. He tears the paper lantern off the light bulb. She utters a frightened gasp, close quotations. Blanche hides from the light. Offred at the end of the novel seeks it. Williams makes symbolic use of dramatic methods, plastic theatre, in portraying Blanche's aversion to the strong light of a naked light bulb and her preference to the, quote, adorable little paper lantern, unquote, revealing her personal insecurities about her imperfections and fear of not marrying well as a result. Additionally, and in congruence with Offred, the motif of light recurs to symbolise the ghosts in both women's worlds and their desperation to avoid the losses of the past. The political and social context of patriarchy in both texts brings into sharper focus the plight of women subjugated by men. Offred, preferring the moon initially as reinforcing her only worth as a fertile woman in a misogynistic world, now wants brighter lights to bolster her mode of survival. Blanche, a Southern belle, accustomed to trading her looks as a precious commodity in a patriarchal society, has long been suffering from fear that this fading beauty reduces her life chances considerably in a male-dominated society. Ironically, it is men, Nick and Mitch, who they look to for salvation in these patriarchal contexts, with both Atwood and Williams reminding their readers that the balance of power is such that no matter how intelligent or resilient a woman might be, the odds are stacked against them. Atwood's response to the anti-feminist backlash of the 1980s and Williams' accurate depiction of the fading values of the South, coupled with the aggressive mores of New America, imply that women in both cultures have to live with disappointment and hope that love can provide some respite. Okay, so if you've got your highlighter or annotation pen, or if you've got this open on a separate document on your screen, I'd like you to highlight some things that I ask you to do now. The first thing I'd like you to highlight and label is the comparative beautiful claim that is non-binary and not oversimplistic. Pause to do that. Unpause when you're ready. The second thing I'd like you to underline or highlight in a different colour is the use of evidence. I want to see where it's used to support the claim, but also where evidence is used elsewhere, peppered around, so that it's wide-ranging. You should be highlighting little bits across this example. With a new colour, I would like you to bracket, and you can use two different colours for this if you want, the literary analysis of the evidence in The Handmaid's Tale and also in Streetcar. The fourth thing I'd like you to do is to, again, bracket off, you can use a different colour for this as well, bracket off where you see this main body paragraph moving on into an AO3, AO4 or AO5 commentary. And if you could also label which kind you think it is, AO3, AO4 or AO5. I'd now like you to highlight or underline, whichever you prefer, where academic comparative language is used. Now, a bit of a warning for this one. There are some obvious uses and there are some more subtle, sophisticated A-level style ones as well. You'll need to scrutinise this example to pick up some of those more subtle ones, but this is so that I'd like you to start using some of the more sophisticated ones. So examples, please, of comparative discourse marking. One more thing. I would like you to put a box around, or if you have more highlighter colours to choose from, where the student has referred to specific authorial methods in their literary analysis. I'm asking you to do that because that has been a previous area of weakness. So go ahead and do that. And label it up. And one more thing, I would like you, if you've got a different highlighter colour, I don't know how many colours we're on to now, but you can simply underline this, where we see, perhaps as examiners, think of yourself as an examiner now, where you see that this student is focused on the central concept. Reminders throughout the example to the examiner that the student is focused on the central concept. You should find these positioned in key places, and that's something that should guide us. Okay, so you've got a really good example here, working with a different question of how to write a comparative main body paragraph. You can see that it's a lot fatter, it's a lot chunkier and more substantial in length than when you're writing a main body paragraph for a single text, but that's just how it is for comparative academic writing, and that's why you're not expected to include as many points. Okay, so my work's almost done here. I say almost. Let me just move myself. You're going to be set this essay on Show My Homework, this comparative essay. It's going to help me towards final judgment of where you're at now at this stage of the course. And with that in mind, I am giving you a couple of opportunities to get some feedback from me step by step. So if you want feedback on your planning, it's got to be with me by the 14th, or whatever the instructions on Show My Homework tell you. If you want feedback on the introduction, it's by that date, and on a single main body paragraph, don't give me your whole essay, just one main body paragraph will do, and conclusions by the 16th. Now, this is directed at the scholars of 2020, and if English students of the future are using this tutorial, I'll be giving you different dates to this, so just be double checking this against Show My Homework. But for the students of 2020, those are your dates. So that just leaves me to say all the very best with this final challenge that's ahead of you. I'm sure you're going to smash it. I hope you enjoy writing it, and I hope that you now see yourself as the academic scholars that you have become, and that you have enjoyed your study separately of Handmaid's Tale and Streetcar. But also, I think you'll find with comparative writing, and this is why exam boards ask you to do it, is that your understanding of each text will actually deepen by comparing them. There's just a glossary here to remind you of some of the things that we went through at the start. And so I'm going to stop there and say thank you for your focus. Well done for your resilience. And I hope you've enjoyed this lesson and learnt from and made progress from it. Thank you.